right? So, and then hopefully by then I would have used the time appropriately. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, national community at large, I am here today in my capacity as a very troubled man. I hold the post of Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and which carries... Ladies and gentlemen of the media, national community at large, I am here today in my capacity as a very troubled man. I hold the post of Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and which carries with it the chairmanship of the National Security Council. And those are, in fact, very weighty responsibilities in our administration and in our effort for peace, good order, and good governance. Day before yesterday, sometime in the afternoon, I recognized on my phone a notification from the Chief Secretary in Tobago, whereby it was indicated that the Chief Secretary has called an extraordinary sitting of the House of Assembly, which, like the Parliament, is on recess, and like the Parliament yesterday, was called to operations for a particular purpose, which warranted persons being called out on the vacation time. Of course, carrying the two offices that I am responsible for, I was interested in finding out what is it that is happening in Tobago which attracts the attention of the Chief Secretary and warranted this. But in the notification it did say the Chief Secretary had a statement to make with respect to the threat to the democracy in Tobago. I became very concerned and interested in it because, given my responsibility for national security and prime ministership, I was interested. So in the following morning, the notification was that this would start at 10 o'clock. Strangely enough, it didn't start at 10 o'clock, it started well after 10 o'clock, which is quite unusual for a notification for parliamentary or sub-parliamentary sitting, but that is not a major matter today. I was there observing to learn what was going on. And then I discovered it was a statement, and the content of it became more and more alarming as the minutes ticked by. And eventually, I was jolted into ongoing shock, as I am now, when the Chief Secretary produced the voice or voice recording of a stranger who was now given the floor of the Assembly to make statements, and carrying alongside the statements what you call the script on the screen being published to the world. Completely shocking and surprising to me as a parliamentarian and who has some knowledge of the laws governing parliamentary practice. And then, shock of all shocks, this person was invited to question whether the Prime Minister was involved in the conspiracy that the Chief Secretary was bearing down on in the Assembly. The person then admitted in the affirmative, yes, that the Prime Minister was involved in this matter. You could imagine my consternation. The person then went on prompting to answer that he met with the Prime Minister, me, on occasions, 2 occasions. And immediately, 2 questions immediately rose, but were not asked. One is where, and the other was when. Those 2 questions were not asked. And then the person went on to say that this meeting, or there was a meeting, which I presume he was involved in, the Prime Minister was present in that meeting with other people, one of whom is Senior Counsel Gilbert Peterson, who, as you know, from time to time would do legal work for me and the state, and of course the PNM leader in Tobago, Mr. Ansel Dennis, and of course, shock, above shock, that in the meeting, which obviously was called for criminal conduct, the Prime Minister, in his presence, got on the phone, called the Commissioner of Police and instructed the Commissioner of Police to do what the Chief Secretary was outlining was happening in Tobago, which is using the police service to conduct investigations to terrorize Tobagonians, trampling upon their rights. And it was a Trinidad heavy hand against Tobago people, driven by the Prime Minister from Trinidad, using the police to carry out illegal and illicit activity in Tobago. And the Chief Secretary then confirmed, or somewhere during the proceedings, that the police had been conducting some execution of warrants in Tobago and had in fact had reason to visit him and some of his colleagues and other persons known to him and others. My immediate alarm was, who is this person who is saying this? Turned out to be a former PDP office holder, colleague of the Chief Secretary. And it then dawned on me that this Chief Secretary had said that he was the one who agreed to meet this person and to make this video, and made it in secret, not known to the person who you were taping. And it happened on more than one occasion. So this production was constructed over a number of days, I presume. And all of this, ladies and gentlemen, brought us, not just me, because I am personally involved because my name is called, but it brought the nation face to face with the following situation. Because in the production of the Chief Secretary, the person whose testimony was being suborned there actually told the Chief Secretary in that production that he, whoever he is, was in communication with the police and had given interrogatory information to the police on a matter of criminal investigation which the police was conducting, in which the Chief Secretary is a subject of the investigation. You all may recall that all of us in Trinidad and Tobago became aware of some video that somebody had produced wherein there were conspiratorial conversations about how certain things will happen in the politics of Tobago and the administration of Tobago, and certain concerns of criminal conduct and misbehavior in public office and so on arose. And in the last 24 hours, I was able to talk to a few people and confirm, yes, the Integrity Commission and the police had in fact been made aware of this situation over and above what was published in the media. And yes, the police had in fact opened an investigation into this matter. This was the same matter that you, the media, carried extensively, mainly the disappearance of the Chief Secretary for 3 weeks without answering questions arising out of this particular matter. But I may jog your memory and tell you, when the Chief Secretary appeared after that 3-week period, he didn't appear to answer questions specifically about his involvement or lack thereof. He appeared to make allegations about some contractor attempting to extort money from him and a whole series of Nancy stories and other stories. And in there, he had reason to seek to implicate me in the matter. I didn't take it very seriously at the time. Here I was a troubled man who was looking for a way out after 3 weeks of being lost. Subsequent to that, the Chief Secretary addressed the Assembly and said, directly accused me of some things to do with the appointment or lack thereof of the Chief Administrator. It was so concerning that I had to go to the Parliament and provide to the Parliament the details and the facts and a dossier of all the documents. And I indicated to this country that if anybody could truthfully contradict what I have said, which was in contradiction to what the Chief Secretary had said, that I will resign this office. That's passed. He promised a response to that. That response has not yet come. But yesterday, another response came. In that video that was allowed onto the floor of the Assembly, the Chief Secretary, knowing that this gentleman who he was talking to was in the hands of the police, providing information and probably affidavit, I don't know, but he was contacted by the police. He said so in the video. So the police, in conducting their investigation in Tobago, had been in touch with this person. So the Chief Secretary then proceeded by special arrangement to get into the Assembly, to use the cover of the Assembly to engage in witness tampering. Because interestingly enough, everything that he produced there in the Assembly, with a production involving a witness who is in active cooperation with the police, he is a beneficiary of any change of the situation. And of course, it is for the law to determine now what grade of perverting the course of justice has taken place in full public view. This does not erase the so-called testimony of this person who had the Assembly floor to voice defamation unchallenged against the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, against the Commissioner of Police, against a magistrate who is described as idiotic, and, of course, it violated every tenet of the existence of privilege and the use of privilege in a House of Parliament or debate in any Commonwealth country. Ladies and gentlemen, this matter is extremely serious. Let us begin by listing them. One, the person who was suborned for that testimony is a police witness. The Chief Secretary has said that as a result of what he has produced in the Assembly, he has exonerated himself and has voiced that he sees no need for himself being investigated. So as far as he's concerned, he has done enough to put an end to the investigation that was actively underway. That takes us into the territory of attempting to pervert the course of justice. If in fact he has succeeded in doing that, what he would have done, and he's now being accused of, is taking personal steps by his production of that situation to suborn testimony to undermine an ongoing police investigation where he is a person under investigation with serious charges likely or possibly to come his way. In short, when the Chief Secretary says that as far as he's concerned, the police investigation, which he denigrated in the production, as far as he's concerned, that should go the way of all flesh and disappear. The Chief Secretary in the Tobago House of Assembly has put himself above the law and has taken steps to ensure that he doesn't only think that he's above the law, but that he acts to put himself above the law. But how could this happen? The Chief Secretary does not have the right, under law or provisions of the Assembly, to do what he has done. I could tell you. I am a member of the House of Parliament in Trinidad and Tobago. I've been so for a long time. The privileges and immunities provided to members of the Parliament are rooted in the Constitution. Very deep roots and protections, where privilege is afforded to members of the House for all the good reasons spelled out there in the law, letter and spirit. I'm not a lawyer. I'm simply now going to take serious legal advice, because the question that has to arise now, based on what has happened in Tobago, is whether the Tobago House of Assembly Act, where provision for immunities and privileges are made, whether in law those privileges are superior to the privileges that are provided to the Parliament under the Constitution. I can tell you as a non-lawyer, it just cannot be. So for Mr. Farley's sake, I hope that he will find somewhere in his search and his investigation that he will find that he has determined, and that the courts will determine, that the privileges afforded to the Tobago House of Assembly are superior to the Parliament, where persons can come and do what he did in the Assembly. First thing, a statement is required to be made. It falls to the presiding officer to follow a standing order. I know of no provision in the Tobago House of Assembly Act to allow the presiding officer to approve, even though in her own discretion, that the Chief Secretary could go and suborn testimony from person or persons unknown. In parliamentary language, that is called a stranger. Those of you who come to the National Parliament will know that if you're in the gallery, you are referred to as a stranger, because you have absolutely no right inside the house, and you can take no part in the proceedings. You can't even laugh if somebody give a joke. And if you clear your throat too loudly, you can be asked to leave the chamber, and you're identified by the chair as that stranger. That is the preservation of the sanctity of the Parliament and its privilege to members of the Parliament. So to give voice to a stranger and then come in the House and give time and exposure to a stranger to make uncontested allegations against the country's leadership, police, Prime Minister, Senior Council, this is absolutely reckless, horrendous abuse of the Tobago House of Assembly and whatever modicum of privilege it may have. And I do not intend to leave it there, because you and I can express any amount of opinions on this matter, but given what the Chief Secretary has done yesterday in Tobago and the far-reaching consequences of his misconduct, this now will have to fall to the courts of Trinidad and Tobago to determine what is right, what is wrong, what is allowable, and what is not in the country of Trinidad and Tobago. This is not a matter of Farley, Augustine, and Prime Minister Rowley anymore. This is a matter of the pillars of governance in the independent nation, in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. I have instructed the Attorney General to obtain serious legal advice on the way forward on this matter. I will tell you, as far as I'm concerned, my eyes are not lying to me. I know what I've seen. I have seen witness tampering, and I've seen attempting to pervert the course of justice. But that's for the court to decide. But I'll tell you one thing. In 2014, this government, which I started in 2015, but in 2014, there was an amendment. It was done in 2014. Miscellaneous Provision of Administration of Justice 2014. Which provisions are there? Section 5 of that act was amended. It amended the Criminal Offences Act. And it offences. One was obstruction of justice, and was witness tampering. Section 11. So, in the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, witness tampering are specifically described and identified. Which says a victim means any person being intimidated, dissuaded, or influenced. And I quote to existing law, who knows, believes that another person assisting in the investigation of an offense or potential uses threats, force, bribery, any to 1A, intimidate or dissuade that other person from assisting in the investigation, evidence. B, that other person to give false evidence, withhold true evidence, not in court witness, or document, record, or other object of goes section 8 to say a person who commits an offense of section which I shall be liable to a one to 5 years. So see of Trinidad and Tobago with a witness. House of Assembly, the Secretary, a most display of arrogance and powerful stupid in front of the and to witness tampering and pontificated on the which he can be accused of signing and obstructing. That brings me to conduct of the presiding officer who facilitates. I can tell you to operate in the Commonwealth. Privilege is not infinite. It is circumscribed. You, members of the media, will know that it has evolved to the point where in Trinidad and Tobago, in our parliament, if you say something which can be interpreted by a member of the public as or have it published in the parliament, libel of some kind, there's provision for that person to approach the speaker and to have a say in the context of what any member would have said that they are offended by, and it will be for the speaker, the presiding officer, the speaker, to determine whether a right can be given of reply to a person like that. I'm not aware that that exists in the assembly. Not aware of that. Now, what I've seen is the Chief Secretary providing facilitation for a total stranger to voice his opinion unchecked, unchallenged, verbally and in script in the proceedings of the Assembly. And today, question is, am I wrong in that? Do I have recourse? Because I can tell you, and I want to emphasize it, nothing that was said in that production of the Chief Secretary concerning me has any basis in fact. It is all based on suborning lies for the purpose of relieving the Chief Secretary of his own personal difficulties. The named person who is now known to you in the media, who would have assisted in that production at the Chief Secretary's home apparently, is a person not known to me. Never met him. Don't know his name except until he came up there recently. Never had any contact with the person or any similar person. And I've taken no part in any operations to undermine the Assembly in any way. On the contrary, if I've done anything to the Assembly, is to favor it, in assisting it, in this period of difficulty as it is in now, to try and service the people of Tobago to the best of their ability, limited as that might be. I deny every syllable of allegation as produced there by the Chief Secretary in the proceedings of the Assembly yesterday. I have not met with that person. I have not met with Gilbert Peterson in any proceedings of that nature. I have not sat with Ansel Dennis in any meeting to discuss any such thing. And I certainly have given no instruction to the police as to how to conduct, or who to have warrants for, or where warrants are to be executed, or how warrants are to be executed. Absolutely. And I would once again say to the country that if any person could provide any evidence to contradict anything I have said about my own conduct, I will resign this office immediately. And I said truthful, because I don't know what is the next thing the Chief Secretary will do. You see, just for the benefit of the media, because I expect that you will pursue this matter, and I take you to the Act of 1986, which created the THA. It was passed in 1986. It provided membership, powers and functions for Tobago House of Assembly. It is not a law-making body. Contrary to the blowing up of chests in Tobago and the wanton disregard for good order that some people believe make them what they are on election night, the Tobago House of Assembly, as an integral part of the administration of Trinidad and Tobago, is largely an administrative body. It is not a lawmaking body, but it has procedures akin to the Parliament. It was provided with some element of immunity, which will now be tested. Because if the Chief Secretary and the presiding officer could do this, then it brings into question, where is the boundary of any immunity or privilege that exists in the Tobago House of Assembly? We know where it exists in the National Parliament. But the Tobago House of Assembly is not the Wild Wild West, where the fastest gun is the biggest guy in town. And I don't care who you choose as your top dog in this country. The size of the kennel is what matters. The standing orders in the Assembly require, as it does in National Parliament, you would have seen me as Prime Minister You would have seen ministers come into the National Parliament to make a statement under these standing orders. And once a statement is to be made, what is the first statement that the maker makes in the Parliament? Says, I am authorized by the Cabinet to make this statement. As Prime Minister, I have to do that. A minister has to do that in any house, Senate or House. That is because on the standing orders of the Parliament, there's also provision called personal explanation. So if you want to make your own personal statement in our country as a parliamentarian or an assemblyman, you have to go under personal explanation. And statements and personal explanations have to be vetted and approved by the person in the chair. You can't just get up there and say what you want or use it for pontification or politicking. It has to be in order, so the privilege is not without some circumspection and is circumscribed as well. I ask you, did you see in that production in the Assembly any reference to anybody but the Chief Secretary? Did he tell the country that he's making that statement on behalf of the executive? Because they do what they want in Tobago in the Assembly. And of course, at an earlier time, you would have seen the minority leader objecting to the fact that while a statement is being made, the Chief Secretary is free to roam and ad lib and say what you want during the statement. That can't happen in the Parliament. The Speaker has a copy of what is approved, and you are required to stay dutifully to what is approved. You can't veer off into anything else. That's why you have to have approval, not in the Assembly. But I want to quote a couple of things here for you on this particular matter. And I'm quoting a little piece of advice that I got last night from quarters, legal quarters. At this stage, I'm quoting, at this stage, one can only assume that this rule was complied with. Right? That's the offering of the approval for the statement. However, it begs the question, how on earth was a video recording of the words of a stranger to the Assembly, who has no audience before the Assembly, be allowed to be played as part of, quote unquote, the statement from a secretary? Further, were the words of this stranger, who has no right of audience before the Assembly, authenticated by anyone, including the presiding officer and her staff? These are pertinent legal questions. I could tell you, Standing Order 45 of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, where it deals with contents of speeches, the rules state, and let me repeat that, the rules in section 45 of the contents of speech state, and I quote, the conduct of members of Parliament or of judges or other persons engaged in the administration of justice shall not be raised except upon a substantive motion moved for the purpose. If this rule is not followed, the standing order states that the reference shall be out of order. Yesterday in the Tobago House of Assembly, I, as Prime Minister, was abused by the Chief Secretary and the presiding officer because I saw no substantive motion, even though I have no voice myself in the Assembly. But for the benefit of the country, if my conduct in any matter is to be called into question in the Tobago House of Assembly, it has to be on a substantive motion. But the laws and the rules of this country does not apply to Farley Augustine or the Tobago House of Assembly. So they could violate the rules of the Assembly and slander me at will. To be able to go outside in the street and tell innocent Tobagonians that the Prime Minister is using the police to persecute them because the Prime Minister has some interest in the outcome of the 2025 election, because the Prime Minister and his party's survival is dependent on the 2 seats in Tobago. That is the rubbish that was being perpetrated that got the Chief Secretary where he is here now in hot boiling water. And Tobagonians were led down there by elected officials, Chief Secretary and Presiding Officer, who violated every tenet of the existence of the Assembly simply because he wanted to slander the Prime Minister and others in a way that gives him what he thinks is an escape hatch from an investigation where he had questions to answer. Gilbert Peterson, SC, Senior Counsel, is a person engaged in the administration of justice. He's an officer of the court. The Chief Secretary go and tell the country and the world that Gilbert Peterson was in a meeting with the Prime Minister where they conspired to get the police to go after people and to get warrants and go and search people unnecessarily. And the Chief Secretary had a lot to say from himself about the conduct of the police, as if the police need him to tell them how to conduct an investigation. A magistrate may have done something in the proceedings. He describes the magistrate as idiotic. Where did Farley Augustine get this power and authority from? And I draw your attention to the fact that the presiding officer in Tobago who facilitated this outrage is the person who ran for the Wim Spring Garden seat and was defeated by the person who is now minority leader, sitting in the chair and facilitating this breach of our laws and regulations to facilitate a reckless, embattled Chief Secretary. We will hear more about that as we proceed. What it tells you is that in Tobago, there's a Chief Secretary who would willfully and maliciously slander the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and others, including the Commissioner of Police and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, who were defenseless to his attacks as he delivered them. There's some officer in there who was supposed to be in this meeting with me, some officer Weaver Ali. I can tell you, media, national citizen, I have no idea who this person is until now. As a matter of fact, after this was done in the Assembly, I had to inquire as to whether Weaver Ali was a man or a woman. But the Assembly was told that I was in a meeting with this person, conspiring and executing this criminal conduct. The magistrate was maligned. The Chief Secretary published slanderous words of a person who is subject to the ordinary laws of the land, in the hope that by doing so, within the walls of the chamber, the courts could not be invited to protect those who are slandered by the false and damaging allegations made by the said person who published the words and whoever took part in producing that video and the outrageous use to which it was put. I'm saying here, he had the support of the presiding officer of the Assembly, and they invented rules that do not exist in the Assembly or anywhere else in the Commonwealth. I expect that the minority leader and his councillor, being the ones in position, will take necessary action against the presiding officer. And I expect that the legal advice that I would give, that I would receive, will guide my conduct from here on in. This has been a remarkable 24 hours. But when he started out in the beginning, he was encouraged by many persons If he was called out then for his initial misconduct, he may have saved himself from what he did yesterday. I await the legal guidance from the Office of the Attorney General, and we take it from there. If you have any questions, I'll take them now. Yes, sir.
Do you envisage the possibility that the government could intervene in Tobago's affairs, virtually unseating the Chief Secretary?
Those things have happened in other parts of the world. We have no such aspiration. I will encourage no such action. I would require the courts to determine what is right and what is wrong in the administration in Trinidad and Tobago. I am not going to advocate any high-handed action like that, because the people of Tobago, not the executive members, the 15 people who were there, John Public in Tobago, is not party to this. They are victims of this, and therefore I will not subject them to any trauma of that nature. I will await the legal advice that will come through civil channels and any action that is available. And also, as you mentioned it, I hereby call publicly, not in any conspiratorial meeting, I hereby publicly call on the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to proceed to investigate any and all persons who took part in this suborning of testimony, who tampered with witnesses, and who seek to undermine an ongoing police investigation. There is provision in the law to treat with persons like that. This is not a police matter. This attempt to slander me in the assembly is not a police matter as far as I know. And I would expect the police to do their job without fear or favor, without malice and without ill will, as I do. Yes?
Dr. Rowley, Doris Polo from CNC. Doris Polo from CNC3?
CNC3.
So my Doris.
Another new name?
Yes. So my question to you, you mentioned the police service and their involvement in what the Chief Secretary would have said. And it seems as though the TTPS has become sort of a political football.
Stop. That's not true.
Right.
TTPS in Trinidad and Tobago is not a political football. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service would have had reason to pursue indications where crime might have been committed. If politicians want to go on platform like the opposition leader did last night and jump up and down, it's a free country still. You simply make a fool of yourself. But I do not want to encourage any conversation that in this country our police service is a political football. So if you phrase the question differently, I might have a different answer, but I'm saying here, what the Chief Secretary has done there and what the opposition leader was glad to receive last night is not the fault of the police service. It is the fault of people who see wrongdoing and try to call it salvation. You would think that the leader of the opposition, a former prime minister, would have seen what had happened in the assembly, and you think she would call it out as wrongdoing or whisper in their ears that, hey, you're going down the wrong road, you're exposing yourself to serious jeopardy? No. Within minutes, she left the parliament where a serious debate was going on. Didn't stay there for a vote. Went on a political platform to use the Tobago House of Assembly outrage as what she calls vindication for her slanderous statements she was making before. As far as she's concerned, she has found the proof of what she was saying. And have a little imp with her, saying, you see what I was telling you all, that police was being used against people for political reasons? I'm saying all those who hang their hat on that peg, you better hope that there's no provision for me to seek recourse in the court of law in this country. So that's where that stands with me.
So the question, Dr. Rowley, are you concerned about how the public would view the TTPS because of the aspersions that were cast by the THA Chief Secretary and the opposition leader on political platforms?
Yes, I'm very concerned about that. That's why I said he slandered the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. He took issue with the nature and approach of their work. He accused them of being agents of the political directorate in the country. That's a clear allegation, unambiguous. And that could not be good for any police service. And all of that is to seek to prevent them from carrying out what I would call a normal investigation. I told you all last week, if you were following the campaigns that's going on, you would have heard me say last week, I was under investigation for a year and a half by the Integrity Commission. It started in a press conference that the UNC had, claiming that I had done something wrong about purchasing a property in Tobago. I came to a press conference in Tobago the next day and I showed you the documents that I had to prove that I didn't do anything wrong. The Integrity Commission investigated me for a year and a half. And I think 2 weeks ago I told you all that the investigation is concluded and the Commission found that they had nothing to ask me to answer for. That is how our laws are supposed to function. Not go and try to suborn testimony that is beneficial to you, bring it into the assembly under some perceived protection and execute it against all those who you believe you can chase away, and then you pronounce that the police now has no basis to. The police now has no basis to investigate me. So he got the testimony, he produced the testimony, he has ruled, judge, jury, and executioner, that he now no longer should be investigated. What a ridiculous state of affairs. But this is not a matter where the police is at fault. This is a matter where the police is being hurt and the country is being hurt, because the gentleman says, in case you all don't understand what I've done, I intend to write the UN and to write the NU and to write the ABC and to write the OES and to write. So he is not content to breach our laws. He is not content to misconduct himself in Tobago, in the assembly. He thinks that we are all stupid. So we will sit here and have him unfettered in his quest, in righteous indignation, to tell the world that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service had the temerity to investigate him. Took him 3 weeks to come before the media and answer, or attempt to answer. That matter is still not answered. It is the investigation by the police which is a continuation of that matter. There's an ongoing investigation. But he's going to write the UN and write the OECS. He learned that from Kamala Prasad Bisesa.
Can you think of, you've been in office for 36 years, Member of Parliament.
36? Feel like more than that.
In that period of time, can you think of any precedent for a presiding officer allowing a member of a body to make an audiovisual presentation involving, as you put it, a stranger?
I personally don't have any such knowledge, and that's why last night I spent time with some legal help checking the Commonwealth, around the Commonwealth, to see if there's any example. Whether it's from New Zealand to India, we have found no example. And all we found is condemnation of any such development. I know of no example, and it is not to be reasonably expected. And of course, if one looks at the mother of parliaments in the United Kingdom, doesn't get the closest I know about that any abuse of the parliament. The closest. There are 2 examples I know. And unfortunately, both are in Trinidad and Tobago. One is where the speaker, where a motion was on the floor. I was on the floor with a motion against the Minister of Finance, outlining details of how that individual had been involved and is responsible for taxpayer losses in something called the Carlton Savannah, that hotel I call the Bricks there now. A motion was on the floor. I presented the motion, and it was now the turn of whoever will answer for him, or he himself. He was minister in the parliament. I think we adjourned, and the next day or sometime we came back. But when it was the turn of the person to answer, as you are to do in the parliament in a debate, because I laid the story out, it's then answered, the speaker, Wade Mark, intervened in the debate and told the Parliament that he received a letter from the judiciary saying that the matter of the Carlton Savannah was sub judice before the court, and therefore there should be no debate. That the Speaker then ruled that since it is sub judice, this debate cannot continue. And he ended the debate. The Speaker ended the debate on that court, Wade Mark. Turns out, immediately after, the judiciary went public and said they are not aware of any such correspondence to Wade Mark, and they have issued no such instructions with respect to that matter. But in the meantime, Wade Mark ended a debate, a substantive motion, because I didn't go in there and start to call Larry Hawaii name just so, because you cannot, in our standing orders, go in the Parliament and cast aspersions on any member without a substantive motion. You want to discuss my conduct in any matter? File a motion, and then every member of the House will then be free to intervene in that debate. But Wade Mark intervened. As soon as the motion was completed by me, when I made my presentation, he didn't allow anybody else in the House to speak. He ended it on a lie. That was one. The second time, another outrage I know of, that certain members of Parliament and others had misconducted themselves. I took that information to the President, President Max Richards, and said to him that because these are public officials governed by the Integrity Commission, I would like you to forward what I got to the Integrity Commission and have them investigate the matter. That's what I did. He did just that. After a month or two, I then asked him, have you heard anything from the Integrity Commission? He said, well, no. I then sought to ask the Integrity Commission if an investigation is underway. I was told no. I said, well, in which case, the Parliament needs to know about this. So I went to the Parliament on a substantive motion, and I raised what I had taken to the President and what was at the Integrity Commission. And I asked in the Parliament for an investigation by the police. And that investigation took place. It has been labeled Emailgate, and my conduct is now a standard for misconduct by the very said people who was under investigation there. So the model is, if you're under investigation, it's called Trumpian. If you're under investigation, you destroy the investigators, you double down on your misconduct, and you tell the rest where to put it. Then, the chairman of the Integrity Commission was overseeing an investigation chaired by Sebastian Venter, who was a member of the Integrity Commission. The chairman ended, or caused to end, because Venter resigned, when the chairman provided a letter to the opposition leader saying that the investigation was over and they found nothing. The opposition leader used that letter of the chairman of the Integrity Commission, where members resigned because they weren't happy with what he had done, came to the Parliament and moved a motion against the opposition leader and voted the opposition leader out of Parliament indefinitely. That was done in Trinidad and Tobago. The person who moved that motion and executed that was Ms. Kamala Prasad Bissessa, and the party was the UNC in Trinidad and Tobago. I can tell you subsequently, the illegality of that was waived. I was out. The people of Diego Martin West had no voice in the Parliament, but I was in their constituency because they couldn't fire me as MP, but they could vote me out of the House, which they did. I have since been properly paid for the period of time for which I was put out of the House by the UNC in that way. Outrageous behavior in the Parliament. Those two examples, unfortunately, that I know of, are in Trinidad and Tobago by the same people. So this one that happened in Tobago here is item number 3. And I was not surprised at all at the alacrity with which the opposition leader jumped on a platform last night to talk about today is Farley, yesterday was Gary, and tomorrow is you. That is their behavior. And if we're not careful, we are on the road of no return. Because people like these, for their own benefit and protection, will destroy our institutions, and they are the first ones to talk about destroying institutions, even as they're shredding it and rendering it in the flames. I'm simply calling on Trinidad and Tobago to be careful. I had no idea that Farley, a man from Anstey House in Bishops, same house I came from, same school I came from, granted you were in different political sides of the political divide, but I had no problem in wishing him well, that he would have been the one to have done this to Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Given that the minority leader is the person in the THA, what exactly can he do in response to this abuse of privilege?
Yes, there are rules. The minority leader, I won't speak for him, but I'm just saying what is open. But I mean, I have just said what I have seen as a liability on the part of the presiding officer. And if he or any member of the Tobago House of Assembly agrees with that, the door is open for a motion to debate it. Because how do we handle our stuff? We debate. We debate. We vote. But we don't bring suborned testimony. And for those of you who don't understand the implication of suborned testimony, go in the dictionary and look up for the meaning of suborn. It's a Latin word. There's two parts. You know, there was a time when you go to school in Trinidad and Tobago, you used to learn Latin, right? And I did. Yeah? So I could tell you, it means, to furnish. It means to get in secret. And you get it, you initiate it. And the man tell you, he taped the man without the man's knowledge. Even when the Romans had Latin as their language, they didn't think that suborn could have been so fitting to an action. Because they had no tapes in those days where you could tape the person, if that is true. But there are a lot of questions here that ought to arise and to be followed by the police in Trinidad and Tobago.
Urbushi from TV6, whereas you have said that legal advice is being sought as it relates to witness tampering and perverting the course of justice, you are of course the Prime Minister, and during your speech just now I did hear the terms defamation and slander. As Prime Minister, are you expected to not deny but prove your innocence, one, and two, are you contemplating such legal action?
I thought I said that we leave no stone unturned. But of course, that will be dependent on the legal action that I get. I don't advise myself in law. Even though I engage in the making of law in the Parliament, I do not advise myself in law on any matter. I seek legal advice. And I said to you, on this matter, it's not about me. This is not about me anymore. It's at the personal level, yes. But at the national level, this is now a national emergency. Do we have a house where executive authority exists, where people have no fetter and could do exactly as they please, even against written instructions as to what shall and shall not be done, to the detriment of citizens? And that brings me to your question. I am a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago first and foremost. The office I hold is incidental as a job, but I have the protection of the Constitution. And that matter of privilege that we take for granted and we talk about a lot, look at its entrenchment in our Constitution and the latitude. It is because it is viewed as a fundamental right for every citizen. That is why the Parliament amended standing orders a few years ago and gave citizens an improvement of access if you think that inside the house, under the privilege, you have been harmed. That meant nothing to some people. So I will await proper legal advice, and the government will seek legal advice to determine what. We are a republic, Trinidad and Tobago. Tobago has a certain element of autonomy. It is not a free state. It is guided by the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. And any person who believes that they are beyond the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, you do so at your peril.
So just a simple follow-up. Given that this allegation involves, the allegation that you would have given certain instructions to the TTPS, of course on Sunday you would have hosted divisional heads of the TTPS for a high-level meeting. Very little has been revealed about the contents, and whereas we don't expect you to reveal anything that will put national security on a back foot, are you able to say what exactly that meeting was about?
I'm sure what could have been said was said. It was said that I received reports on the status of crime fighting in the various districts. You see, attempting to make these into clandestine arrangements, it's not. It was a meeting of the divisional heads, all the divisional heads, because we are in fact being subjected to an assault by the criminal element. I am chairman of the National Security Council. The only way I can chair that council is to know what's going on. I heard again, and I'm sorry to come back to this, I heard again the opposition leader and other people in the opposition making an issue of the fact that the Prime Minister talks to somebody in the police service. So these are appropriate contacts. I receive on a virtual, almost daily basis, what is called a special branch report. Mrs. Prasad Bissessa ought to be receiving those two when she was Prime Minister. Now, I don't know what she did with them, but every Prime Minister from Dr. Williams, and it's spelled out in the cabinet instructions way back in the 60s. Every Prime Minister of this country interfaces with the police, special branch reports to the police, and also sends an almost daily report to the Prime Minister. So where is this nonsense that if the Prime Minister has a meeting of the heads of division and the head of the army and the head of the prison and the head of the SSA, and they sit down and they report to the government, what is reportable? You know, if the Minister of Health goes into the Ministry of Health and says he wants to meet with the leadership in public health as he did during COVID, he doesn't go out and tell them what injection to give anybody or what diagnosis to make or who to pronounce dead or who to pronounce alive. But from an administrative standpoint, you oversee want your minister to know what is going on in the hospital, right? Because if a candle goes out or if a needle is missing, who do you call? Not Ghostbusters, you know. You call the minister. And you hold the minister accountable. So in one breath, these idiots want to hold you accountable for every possible thing, reasonable or otherwise, but in the same breath or the other side of the mouth, don't have anything to do with it. I cannot chair properly and effectively the National Security Council if I have no inflow of information from the security apparatus. But if I abuse it, I'm not going to a police station and telling anybody who to let go, who to bring into the station. I don't have any authority to tell the SSA who to put on cover. But I have the right and the duty and the job to receive information from them. And when I receive that information, then my chairmanship can be affected and be effective. So I ask you as people and as media, do not fall prey to the emotive and political self-serving foolishness that is taking this country down a road that is detrimental to your well-being. And yesterday in the assembly was a classic example of persons believing the nonsense that they were talking.
Dr. Rowley, taking you up on the offer to segue just a bit. When you mentioned the vetted unit at first, right? I'm seeking clarity. When you first announced it, it was to weed out corruption from the TTPS, the immigration and customs as well. And then you spoke further about it on a radio program where you said it was a recommendation by the FBI to CARICOM nations, including ours, to be able to work with us on transnational crime. So I would like just some clarity on whether the unit will do both, whether it will be split.
Police work is overlapping. A traffic policeman sees an illegal action passing on the road. He may move from being a traffic policeman to being another kind of policeman. The police has several divisions. And you heard the commissioner yesterday, who is a career police officer, saying to the country in response to this concern that there are several vetted units in the police service. Several. And that is where it's at. We realized that we were being overwhelmed by the flow of ammunition from America. I think we all, Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of CARICOM, concluded that the American supply chain is where we were, where our difficulties were starting. And we were saying to ourselves that the main country supplier, the United States, could do more to make it more difficult for people to easily flood us with arms. We made the case to the United States that you too have an interest in the safety and security in the Caribbean. There are many Americans here every day among us. If we are insecure or unsafe here, many persons will move. Maybe not in large numbers like Mexico and Honduras and so. But so therefore, you have a duty. You have more resources than we have. But you also have lax gun laws that is affecting us. And we kept hammering it out. Come on board and help us. The U.S. has always been helping us. We have units in the police service that get training from the United States on a regular basis. As Prime Minister in this building in the center, I met here on a regular basis with American people who are in fact helping the region. Our defense force has great contact with Southern Command in Florida. Our people go there to be trained. Sometimes they come here to bring the training here. This is ongoing. So if now we are saying let us focus more on this question of the movement of arms and ammunition and the identification of traffickers, the U.S. agreed to do that. But one of the requirements of that agreement is that we in the police service, in order to interact with their service and preserve the integrity of the operations, that we need to have vetted units where we can rely on the integrity of the officers who will be given certain corridors of activity and certain corridors of information. Because I tell you one thing, a lot of the successes that we have had here in drug fighting, in gun running, comes usually with some input from our collaborators outside. The US, the British, the French, the Dutch. The British maintain a guardship in the Caribbean all the time. And in hurricane season, it's very, very important to us. The whole question of following drug traffickers in marine vessels, the US Coast Guard, and all the other US chains, what we have managed to do in terms of going down to the level, the nitty-gritty of gun running and gun purchase and gun trafficking, the US has now allowed us, our people, or we're working towards our people, working with the US agencies, the ATF, the FBI. So their resources are now available to us in a way that it wasn't available before. And that's a success. When the questions you ask about what has been the outcome of the crime symposium, we're saying it has been tremendously successful because the US has paid attention to the CARICOM call and the CARICOM needs and have come to us with some specific inputs. Because when we went to Los Angeles and the Summit of the Americas, we said to the Americans, we didn't come for a photo op. We want to leave here with some specific inputs from you on the matters that hurt us. The economy, food, security, and finance. And the President of the United States absorbed that and put the Vice President in charge of dealing with us specifically on this matter. And one of the complaints that we made then was that we are close to you, but we're very far from you. You're not taking us on. You're looking over our heads. And we need more interaction with your decision makers. Since September last year to now, we have had more contact, direct contact with the US decision makers than in the last 10 years. It wasn't by accident that that powerful delegation came here, bilateral delegation came here for the CARICOM 50th anniversary, led by the Secretary of State. We are engaged in that way. So it is very disappointing when some of our local people seek to present this as some problem for the government to explain, and the government is doing this and the government is doing that. If you knew anything about anything, you wouldn't get up and say that a vetted unit in the police service will cause jealousy and will cause a destruction of the service. We have many in there already. As a matter of fact, under the Patrick Manning administration, when the crime was escalating in the way it was, what was formed then was something called a Special Anti-Crime Unit, SAUTT, SORT. To get into that in the police service, you had to be vetted. And many persons couldn't get in there because they couldn't pass the vetting. So don't be surprised if there are some people saying we shouldn't have vetting. But it's standard practice in the police now. And you'd have heard the commissioner saying that we are now at the stage where we're heading towards vetting the national operation units. Because you need to be able to rely on your officers in a particular way. And who is who in Trinidad and Tobago to say we don't have a problem with that? And how would you deal with it? Just blame the Prime Minister? Blame the Minister? Change the Minister? No, we are changing where the problem is. And that's why we are so concerned that these things that we're doing are not being fully understood by the population and falling for the old talk.
Prime Minister, can I ask you, last night in Parliament you were saying you agreed with everything your colleague said on the issue of the amendment to the procurement legislation.
Did somebody see something I shouldn't agree with? Because I did do something which was argue from extremes, which I don't normally do. So if you know something I shouldn't agree with, let me hear it.
No. So the point is, why did the Minister of Finance change the amendments, adjust the amendments, given the fact that your side had a majority and would have passed whether it was adjusted or not?
Well, we were not blind to some of what was being said. We have to comfort people. It's one thing to use the majority that you have and just proceed and say, I can vote it. But we listened to what was being said, and we realized that some people need to be convinced that this is not cavalier action and self-serving on the part of the government, that there would be some oversight, additional oversight. So we added that. It wouldn't be to the detriment of what we want to do, but it should bring some comfort to those people for whom being told that there is oversight to be had, that they will understand that the government has not acted against their interests. Right? And that's why you have a debate. Unfortunately, when you have these debates in our parliament, one side is accusatory and the other side is trying to say, well, our parliament is very divided, but it's not unusual. I mean, other parliaments in the world are like that too, but the government has to govern. Otherwise, the country is in trouble.
Oh, Kim has a question.
I have two questions and then I have another round.
Okay, I get the last chance.
Yeah. Last two questions. Vashi, one from you, please, and one from the lady. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'll go first, Prime Minister. Good afternoon. Kim Bojram from The Express.
Yes.
So I'm sorry to have to take you back to the Chief Secretary, but what I want to ask, and you did speak at length as to why, why these actions may have taken place given that the Chief Secretary is under investigation, etc. But I have to go back and ask you, that's a big piece of action to put yourself out there, and then for a stranger, which is also the two, to have come out there and done this, go head on with the government, with the Prime Minister. I mean, well, is there any other motive behind that you would want to speculate? It's a big place for the Chief Sec to go.
I don't want to speculate beyond that because I think I've gone very far on it, and I've done so on the basis of the evidence in front of me. I don't know what the evidence will, I don't know where it's going to end. This is an ongoing process right now. This is an ongoing matter in Trinidad and Tobago, and it is not only about me personally, it is a governance issue now. And of course, I have my advisors, and so does he. I don't know what his advisors told him to do, but he's done that, and I think that we got a problem.
Mr. Prime Minister, a few weeks ago at the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting, you were named the head of the Cricket Committee, and you were due to meet with them the following week. Do you have any updates for us?
Can you just go? No, actually, so far, what I'm doing right now, I'm kind of like canvassing some opinions on some stakeholders, some broad, just canvass some opinions. It is my intention in the very near future to host a webinar to allow a lot of people from around the region and outside of the region to participate in a general discussion on West Indies cricket. After that, I'm also, well, during that period, I'm also hoping to receive some script, one-pagers and so, from a number of people whose opinions I value. And when I get all of that, I'm hoping to initiate a discussion on the way forward for West Indies cricket. You see, all I am is a chairman of a committee, so please don't hold me responsible for West Indies cricket. I am chairman of a CARICOM committee, where CARICOM believes that the population expects that the CARICOM leadership could play some role in assisting West Indies cricket, that valuable legacy, out of the miasma into which it has fallen. I am busy talking to a lot of people, but very soon we will have a bit more to say. But I'm not here as the knight in shining armor coming over the hill to save West Indies cricket. I want to facilitate, first and foremost, an understanding and come up with some kind of a diagnosis and a prognosis to go with it. Thank you all very much. Thanks for coming.
TTT News, delivering more news more often to more people. TTT News, reporting on the people, events and issues that affect your life. TTT News, online and fully interactive at TTT Live Online. TTT.
Thank you so much for staying with us. This is 6 months in an interview with Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. Dr. Rowley, thank you for taking the time to join us in studio.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Is the portfolio of Prime Minister what you thought it would be?
Not quite.
How has it surprised you?